Something unusual happened on the ice in Milan that afternoon. It wasn't a fall, and it wasn't a mistake. It was something quieter than that, something subtle enough that at first almost nobody reacted. Inside the arena, the crowd was still settling in. Jackets brushed against plastic seats as people shifted into place. Conversations drifted softly across the stands. Cameras were being adjusted, and the glow of phone screens flickered here and there as spectators prepared to record the performance. It was the kind of moment that normally disappears into the background of a competition, except this time, a few people noticed. Down near the judging panel, one official leaned forward slightly, not dramatically, just enough to change the angle of his view toward the center of the rink. A moment later, another judge adjusted their position in their chair. These were small reactions, almost invisible to the audience, but in figure skating, small reactions from judges often mean something important has just happened or is about to happen. At center ice stood Ilia Malinin. He wasn't moving quickly. In fact, he was moving slower than usual. A gentle glide carried him along the outer edge of the rink, his blade carving a thin silver line across the surface. One quiet push, then another. The movement looked calm, controlled, almost effortless. If you had watched Malinin skate before, that detail alone might have caught your attention. Speed had always been part of his identity on the ice. Over the last few seasons, Malinin had built a reputation that at first sounded almost exaggerated. Fans started calling him the Quad God, not as a joke, more like a description of what he was capable of doing. In 2022, he became the first skater in history to successfully land the quadruple axel in international competition. A jump involving 4.5 rotations in the air, something experts had debated for decades but rarely seen attempted seriously. For years, that jump existed mostly in theory. Coaches talked about it, analysts speculated about it, but very few skaters were willing to risk it in competition. Then Malinin landed it. Suddenly, the limits of the sport looked different. So when a skater known for explosive speed begins a routine slowly, people notice. Near the camera line, 2 reporters had already been whispering earlier that afternoon. Nothing dramatic, just quiet speculation. Apparently something about Malinin's routine had changed. Not a small adjustment, but something structural. One European coach who had watched the morning practice session had reportedly mentioned it briefly in a hallway conversation. He didn't say the program looked better. He didn't say it looked worse. He simply said it looked different. In elite figure skating, that word carries weight. Programs are normally engineered with incredible precision. Coaches design the layout carefully, calculating where each jump should appear to maximize points and protect stamina. Early jumps, mid-program clusters, late bonus elements. There's a familiar architecture that experienced viewers recognize almost immediately. The rumor circulating around the arena suggested Malinin had rearranged something deeper than choreography, the structure itself, and then the music began. A low tone spread through the arena speakers. It wasn't the kind of dramatic orchestral opening many skaters rely on. The sound was slower, more atmospheric, almost cinematic. Malinin pushed forward, still no jump. 20 seconds passed, 30. Somewhere in the upper rows, a spectator whispered quietly, "Why hasn't he started yet?" It was a fair question. A skater known for extreme technical difficulty usually accelerates quickly into the first jump. Instead, Malinin traced another wide curve across the rink. A long glide, a deep edge, and slowly, almost without anyone noticing the exact moment it happened, the entire arena began to quiet down, not because someone asked them to, but because people were starting to realize something unusual was unfolding. At the judging table, one official glanced briefly down at the element sheet and then back up at the ice. The entry line Malinin was drawing across the rink didn't match the expected structure of the program, and in that moment, something subtle shifted inside the arena. Not excitement yet, curiosity. Malinin leaned slightly onto his left edge. His shoulders rotated. His body aligned into a preparation line that experienced observers immediately recognized. He was about to jump. But the trajectory was wrong, too short, too direct. For a split second, several people on the technical panel thought the same thing. If the angle of that approach meant what they suspected, then Malinin wasn't opening the routine with the jump everyone expected. He was about to attempt something else, something no one in that arena had ever seen him do before. Suddenly, the quiet arena didn't feel quiet anymore. It felt like the entire building was holding its breath. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The music continued pulsing softly through the speakers, but almost nobody in the crowd was paying attention to it anymore. Their attention had shifted entirely to the line Malinin was tracing across the ice. He completed the short curve and pushed forward again, still calm, still controlled. If anything, it looked almost too calm. That detail mattered more than most viewers realized. Skaters preparing for their most difficult jumps usually build visible momentum, long approach patterns, powerful crossovers, speed increasing rapidly across the ice. Malinin wasn't doing that. Instead, the entry line remained compact and efficient. Near the judging panel, a technical specialist slowly lowered their pen toward the scoring sheet. Only a few jumps in modern figure skating use an entry like that, and one of them carries enormous risk. Malinin bent his knees slightly. His arms moved inward. The compression of his body lasted only a fraction of a second, but experienced observers immediately recognized the mechanics. The setup was precise and efficient. Then he left the ice. The takeoff happened so quickly that some spectators didn't fully register it until he was already rotating in the air. His body tightened instantly, shoulders locked, legs aligned. Rotation began almost immediately. 1 rotation, 2, 3, 4. Even seasoned commentators often struggle to count rotations during a live broadcast. The motion happens too quickly for the human brain to process clearly without slow-motion replay. But the judging panel wasn't guessing. They watched everything: the takeoff edge, the height of the jump, the alignment of his body during rotation, every small detail that determines whether a jump receives full value. When Malinin came down, the blade struck the ice with a sharp slicing sound that echoed across the arena. A small spray of frost lifted into the air. The landing held. Not perfectly centered, the blade slid slightly farther than ideal before stabilizing, but it was clean. For a brief moment, the arena didn't erupt. Instead, there was a strange half-second of collective processing. Thousands of people silently asking the same question at the same time. Did we really just see that? Then the applause began. Not explosive at first, more like a wave spreading slowly through the stands as realization moved from one section of the arena to another. Because that opening element had already pushed the technical difficulty of the program into territory most skaters would never risk at the beginning of a routine. And yet Malinin had placed it within the first minute. What made the moment even more unusual was his reaction, or rather the lack of one. He didn't raise his arms. He didn't acknowledge the crowd. He didn't pause. Instead, he continued skating almost immediately, flowing directly into the choreography that followed. That's something many people notice about Malinin. Some athletes allow a successful jump to reset their rhythm. They take a breath. They allow the crowd to respond. Malinin rarely does, and in this case, the choice seemed intentional. As he moved into the next section of the program, something else started becoming clear. The opening jump wasn't just difficult. It was a signal that the structure of this routine might be very different from what anyone inside that arena had expected. And if that was true, then the most difficult moments of the program might still be ahead. By the time the applause from the first jump began to settle, something subtle had changed inside the arena, not the noise, but the atmosphere. The crowd was no longer just watching a routine. They were trying to figure something out, because the opening element had already broken the usual rhythm of a competitive program. And now, the pattern was continuing. Out on the ice, Malinin moved into a sequence of turns that carried him diagonally across the rink. Step sequences rarely excite casual viewers. They don't produce the explosive reaction of a massive jump, but judges watch them extremely carefully. Every edge, every transition, every shift of balance matters. His blade carved tight curves across the ice as the choreography unfolded. Quick turns, short bursts of speed, a brief extension of the arms that followed the rise of the music. If you were watching casually, it looked smooth. If you were watching closely, something else became noticeable. The routine didn't feel predictable. Normally, elite skating programs follow a structure that experienced viewers recognize almost immediately. Coaches place the highest value jumps at specific moments to maximize scoring bonuses. There's usually a rhythm, a beginning, a middle build, and then the final technical push. But Malinin's program wasn't unfolding that way. The difficult elements were appearing earlier, closer together, placed in positions where audiences didn't expect them. Near the boards, a coach from another national team stood with his arms folded, watching carefully. He had probably studied Malinin's previous programs dozens of times, memorizing the usual patterns, the timing of each jump, the rhythm of the choreography. But what he was seeing now didn't match those patterns, and that realization made the moment even more fascinating. Because if the structure had truly changed, then everyone inside the arena, judges, coaches, reporters, and fans, was witnessing something new being built in real time on the ice.